A man is sitting beside a corpse, eating bread off its chest. Another is waist deep in a pit of human waste, praying the ladder doesn't snap. And one unlucky clerk just burst into flames at his desk. These weren't punishments, these were jobs. And the people doing them didn't just risk dying, they risked dying in ways so bizarre that modern HR departments would simply close the building and go home. Let's start with a profession that literally paid you to eat other people's sins. Someone in your village dies. The family is grieving. The priest says prayers. Neighbors gather around the body. And you walk in hungry because this is your job. In parts of the 17th and 18th century Britain, families hired a man called Sin Eater. His role was simple, horrifying, and incredibly bad for long-term career prospects. A piece of bread and a mug of ale were placed directly on the corpse. The idea was that the food would absorb the dead person's sins. Lying, cheating, theft, whatever strange hobbies people had going on in rural Wales. Then you ate it. Every bite. And congrats, you now spiritually own a stranger's entire moral resume. The theology made sense to some people. The hygiene absolutely did not. You're eating food that has been sitting on a dead body in an area where washing your hands was considered an experimental lifestyle choice. The corpse could be carrying the plague. Dysentery. Infections so unpleasant that doctors hadn't even bothered naming them yet. Medicine in the 1700s was basically a combination of prayer, guessing, and hoping the patient died quietly. But the physical danger wasn't even the worst part. The real curse of the Sin Eater was social. Villagers believed you literally carried the sins of the dead inside your body. Nobody sat next to you. Nobody invited you to dinner. Children were warned to stay away from you like you were a walking haunted house. You ate their sins. You absorbed their diseases. And when you died, nobody wanted your sins either. Your payment? Bread. The same bread you just ate off a corpse. A truly circular economy. But at least this job didn't end with your bones snapping under pressure, because the next one absolutely does. It's 1917, and young women across America are lining up for what seems like the best job in town. The work is clean, the pay is good, and the factory produces glowing watch dials for soldiers fighting overseas. The secret ingredient is radium, a brand new scientific miracle that newspapers claim can cure everything from headaches to baldness. People were putting radium in cosmetics, even drinking radium water. So when the factories handed it to teenage girls and told them it was perfectly safe, nobody questioned it. Your job was simple. You sit at a desk painting tiny numbers onto watch faces. To keep the brush sharp, supervisors teach you a technique called lip pointing. Dip the brush in the glowing paint, lick the tip to make it fine again, and keep working. You repeat this hundreds of times a day. Each lick sends another trace of radioactive material into your body. At first, the job seems glamorous. After their shifts, the girls walk home faintly glowing in the dark. Their dresses sparkle, their hair shimmers. Some even paint their fingernails with the luminous paint before going out dancing. The glow, unfortunately, is not fashion, it's radiation. Radium behaves like calcium, which means the body happily stores it inside bones. Once there, it begins quietly destroying them from the inside. Teeth loosen and fall out. Dentists, trying to remove infected teeth, sometimes pull away entire sections of the jawbone. One woman's spine collapsed while she was simply standing up. The companies insisted nothing was wrong. The women were called hysterical, emotional, dramatic, which is a bold diagnosis when your employees are literally glowing in the dark. Eventually, the Radium Girls sued and won, changing workplace safety laws across America. A huge victory. Unfortunately, most of them were already dead, but at least radiation takes time. The next job preferred a faster method. London in the 1800s was the largest city on Earth, home to millions of people packed into narrow streets. Unfortunately, the plumbing system had not caught up with the population. For centuries, most waste simply ended up in gutters or the River Thames. When that stopped working, the city came up with a new solution. Send people underground to deal with it. You are now a Victorian sewer cleaner, sometimes called a tosher or a gong farmer. Your workplace is a network of tunnels filled with the combined waste of nearly 2 million Londoners. Your job is simple. Climb down, shovel sewage into buckets, and try not to die. The air alone can kill you, Victorian sewers produced methane, ammonia, and hydrogen sulfide. Invisible pockets of gas called choke damps could knock a man unconscious instantly. Passing out while standing in sewage usually ends badly. Then there were the rats. Victorian sewer rats were enormous, aggressive, and extremely comfortable living in tunnels full of food. Workers waded through darkness without seeing what they stepped on: broken glass, rusted metal, dead animals, and sometimes co-workers who never made it back up. Many died from infections, others drowned during floods, and somehow people still competed for the job. Because at least it paid regularly, also technically it counted as indoor work, and yet the next job on this list made sewer work look like a spa day. It's the late 1800s, and matches are one of the greatest conveniences of modern life. For consumers, lighting a fire is now as simple as striking a small wooden stick. For the teenagers working inside match factories, however, the experience is slightly less convenient. Specifically, it involves their faces slowly dissolving. Match factories relied on white phosphorus because it ignited easily and was extremely cheap. Two qualities that apparently outweighed the small issue of it being violently poisonous. Most workers were young women and girls who spent 12 to 14 hours a day breathing phosphorus fumes in poorly ventilated rooms. Workers did not. The disease they developed was called phossy jaw, which sounds almost whimsical until you learn what it actually does. It begins harmlessly enough with toothaches and swollen gums. Then the jawbone starts rotting from the inside. Teeth fall out. Pus collects in the tissue. Surgeons eventually had to remove entire sections of bone. And in the dark, the infected jaw sometimes glowed faintly green. Factories knew this was happening. They continued production anyway. Phosphorus was cheap, and apparently basic human decency was not. Workers eventually went on strike in 1888 and won reforms. Small comfort for the ones who had already lost their jaws, but at least phossy jaw was slow. The next job preferred to bury workers much faster. Ancient Rome had several options for criminals. You could be fined, imprisoned, or executed. But if the judge was feeling especially creative, you might be sent to the silver mines. Most prisoners preferred execution. Roman silver mines, particularly in Spain's Rio Tinto region, were essentially underground death subscriptions. Tunnels were carved barely wide enough for a person to crawl through because comfort was not considered an important engineering feature. There were no supports, no ventilation, and absolutely no concern for long-term employee retention. Miners spent their days breathing clouds of lead and mercury dust while hacking rock in total darkness. Lead poisoning slowly destroyed the nervous system. First came tremors, then paralysis, eventually a creeping madness that Roman doctors noticed but couldn't explain, possibly because they were also breathing lead. Tunnel collapses buried entire crews. Underground fires consumed the oxygen. Exhausted miners climbing hundreds of feet of ladders sometimes simply let go. Roman records mention that bodies were often left underground because retrieving them was not cost effective, which meant miners frequently worked beside the skeletons of the previous shift. Quiet co-workers, excellent listeners, significantly better off than the people still digging. Life expectancy in the mines was estimated at less than 3 years. The Romans called it punishment. Historians call it something closer to industrialized murder. But if you think this is bad, something way worse is yet to come. In the 1800s, someone looked at the crushing, lightless depths of the ocean and decided it would make an excellent workplace. The diving suit weighed nearly 90 kilograms, complete with lead boots, heavy enough to ensure you couldn't run from any problems. Not that running was an option underwater anyway. On your head sat a copper helmet connected to the surface by a single air hose. One hose. That hose delivered oxygen, removed carbon dioxide, and served as your entire life support system. If it kinked, you had seconds. If it snapped, you had less. When a hose failed at depth, the pressure difference could force the diver's body violently upward into the helmet. Recovery crews occasionally hauled up suits containing what official reports politely called compressed remains. The ocean, it turns out, is very efficient at recycling. Even surviving the dive didn't guarantee a happy ending. Ascending too quickly caused decompression sickness. Nitrogen bubbles formed inside the blood and joints, producing agony divers described as their bones trying to escape their bodies. Some came up screaming, others went permanently paralyzed. Colleagues quietly agreed that the ones who died instantly were the lucky ones. Every dive was a negotiation with physics. Physics never lost. But at least the ocean killed quickly. The next job preferred something far slower and much smokier. Victorian England ran on coal. Coal required chimneys, and chimneys required cleaning. The problem was that most chimneys were extremely narrow. The solution was to find someone small enough to crawl inside them. Boys as young as 5 were sold or apprenticed to chimney masters. The job description was simple. Climb inside a dark brick chimney using your elbows and knees, scrape soot from the walls, and try not to die before dinner. The chimneys were hot, narrow, and frequently full of toxic soot. Children often became stuck halfway up. When this happened, masters had a brilliant motivational technique. They lit small fires underneath the chimney. Nothing encourages productivity like flames. One 12-year-old boy named George Brewster became trapped inside a chimney in 1817. His master forced him back into the flue several times despite the screams. They pulled him out only after he stopped making noise. He died shortly after. Those who survived the job developed chimney sweep's carcinoma, the first occupational cancer ever recorded. Soot caused aggressive scrotal tumors, often before the workers reached adulthood. Victorian society looked at 5-year-olds climbing burning chimneys and decided this counted as employment. But at least those kids knew their job was dangerous. The next profession killed workers who thought they were just digging holes. In the early 1800s, medical schools had a problem. They needed bodies for anatomy lessons, but British law only allowed the dissection of executed criminals. Unfortunately, there were far more medical students than murderers. The market responded. Body snatchers, politely known as resurrection men, solved the shortage by digging up fresh graves and selling the contents to medical schools. The fresher the corpse, the higher the price. This created perhaps the darkest workplace incentive structure in history. The job came with risks. Cemeteries contained plenty of diseases, including cholera and tuberculosis. Families sometimes guarded graves with weapons. Angry mobs considered nearly beating a grave robber to death a perfectly reasonable neighborhood activity. Then 2 entrepreneurs named William Burke and William Hare noticed a flaw in the business model. Digging up bodies took time. Making bodies was faster. Between 1827 and 1828, they murdered 16 people and sold their corpses directly to an anatomist. No digging required. Burke was eventually caught, executed, and publicly dissected in front of medical students. His skeleton still hangs in a museum today, which is probably the only time someone in this profession ended up contributing to science voluntarily. And if you thought this was scary, you're not ready for what comes next. Cinnabar is a beautiful, bright red rock, heated in a furnace, and it releases mercury, a liquid metal prized since ancient times. For over 2,000 years, the mines of Almaden in Spain produced mercury for empires across the world. The workers, however, rarely lasted long enough to enjoy the view. Mining cinnabar meant digging deep underground, hauling the ore to furnaces, and breathing mercury fumes all day. Mercury attacks the nervous system slowly and methodically. First came the tremors, hands shook constantly, which is inconvenient when your job involves tools and fire. Then came headaches, mood swings, and teeth loosening in their sockets. Eventually, the shaking became so violent, doctors gave it its own name, mercury tremors. Some miners began hallucinating. Others lost the ability to walk properly or remember basic things like where they worked and why. The Roman writer Pliny the Elder noted that workers sometimes tied animal bladders over their faces to filter the fumes. It was a creative solution that accomplished absolutely nothing. Mercury vapor pooled in low tunnels. Occasionally, a miner would walk into one of these invisible pockets and collapse mid-sentence. Efficient shift turnover, at least. And somehow, the next job managed to explode even faster. In 1867, Alfred Nobel invented dynamite and became extremely wealthy. The people hired to manufacture it became extremely careful, or at least they tried to. Dynamite relies on nitroglycerin, a chemical so unstable that dropping it, heating it, shaking it, or occasionally just upsetting it emotionally could cause it to explode. Factory workers spent their days mixing nitroglycerin, packing it into sticks, and preparing it for transport. The job required steady hands, calm nerves, and a general acceptance that today might be your final shift. Accidents happened often. When dynamite factories exploded, they tended to do so thoroughly. Witnesses to several 19th century incidents reported that after the blast, there were no bodies to recover, only scattered tools, clothing fragments, and a sudden need to hire new employees. Those who survived daily exposure developed something known as dynamite headaches. Nitroglycerin vapor expanded blood vessels in the brain so violently that workers described the pain as their skull trying to resign from the job. The strangest part was the weekends. Workers built up tolerance during the week, then spent Saturdays in agony as their bodies adjusted back. They actually felt better at work than at home, which might be the most relatable workplace complaint in history. So next time work feels unbearable, remember the people who did their jobs while glowing with radiation, breathing poison, or standing next to chemicals that could explode if someone sneezed too aggressively. History's workplaces were less about career growth and more about surviving until lunch. And if you enjoyed this trip through history's worst career decisions, subscribe, because next time we're diving into something even worse.